welcome back to our podcast. It's really good to have you with us again today. I'm joined today by Rosie, and Rosie and I are going to have a bit of a conversation today about what's important to her, about some of her experiences round about that whole mental health and wellbeing thing, and then we'll see where we go with it. So, Rosie, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, how you got to be here, not necessarily here podcasting with me, but how you got to be here, and kind of what your involvement with us as an organisation is.
So I am currently a trainee counsellor volunteering with Healing for the Heart. I joined about just a year and a little bit ago, January 2021, I think.
Is that a year ago already?
Yeah, I know, it's flown in. And yeah, I've been really enjoying my time here so far. I'm studying at the University of Abertay, so I'm studying a master's in counselling there.
That's in Dundee?
Dundee, yeah. Which I've been doing for 3 years. So I am due, my last day of uni is May 19th, so it's actually mere weeks away. I'm very
not
ready
that you're
for
counting,
it.
not that you're counting or anything.
It's actually May 19th. Yeah, it's been 3 years, which I've really enjoyed the course, and I'm really enjoying applying it here for my placement, but I think I'm ready now to stop studying and wearing so many different hats, because I suppose a little bit about what kind of led me to study and end up here. In my other job, I work for Who Cares Scotland, who are a national charity supporting people with care experience, and for anyone who doesn't know, people who have grown up in care in whatever shape or form, and I kind of stumbled into that. My undergrad degree was in film and media, so I went for a comms job with Who Cares, and I ended up in a kind of different role which actually involved a lot more kind of youth work, and I realised I love this is so up my street, and from that I actually went on to work for Childline for a couple of years as a counsellor. So largely, like, Childline is volunteer based, but they also have some staff counsellors to make sure we've got resource for every child or young person who phones or contacts us. And then I just loved that, and I thought, this is what I want to do. So that's when I started studying, and yeah, I'm on my placement here, and I'm back working at Who Cares, but volunteer for Childline still as well, because I did love it so much.
Fabulous. It sounds like you're around lots of children and young people, and that clearly sets a spark on fire for you as something that you really enjoy doing.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
In Healing for the Heart, though, you're working predominantly with adults over 18s. Obviously, we do have a children's service, but we're expanding that. So that's something that we're having a conversation about at the moment, isn't it? Why don't you tell us a wee bit about your experience then round about children and young people? You know, what matters to children and young people in terms of mental health and wellbeing? What are you seeing? What are you picking up round about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think I'll largely kind of draw on my experience at Childline, because you hear from so many different children and young people, different backgrounds, different experiences, different priorities. So I think kind of common themes that come up often, there's kind of like, I think children and young people, well, throughout history and certainly now as well, there's some really common things around like peer pressure, I would say, is a big deal, which can be a force for good in terms of, you know, reinforcing really positive habits and kind of ways of seeing the world and living your life, but also can come with negatives and a lot of pressure to kind of fit in a crowd. I mean, we all, I think, as human beings want to belong, so it's no surprise that for children and young people there's that drive to fit in and be the one that doesn't kind of stick out, or also to then be the loudest one in the group or whatever. But it can be really difficult then to also retain your sense of self and who you are and what matters to you and what feels good for you. So that comes up a lot. I would say as well, something that comes up a lot in kind of modern times is like living lives online. I think increasingly we as a society are living our lives more and more online, but I think that's even more potent for children and young people who social media, like, wow, I find as an adult it's quite overwhelming at times, and I kind of count my lucky stars I didn't have access to all of the social media now that children and young people have access to now. Like, I watched a documentary recently about Instagram, and it was saying how kind of in terms of evolution, human brains are not wired to understand that what we see on social media is not real. Like, we can think it, but we can't fully grasp that concept. So children and young people are seeing kind of influencer culture, stuff even like I hear a lot about like Love Island and expectations around body image and not able to kind of distinguish that from the reality. It starts to feel like everyone is like leaving these like really fulfilling, happy lives, and I'm over here, you know, with my worries and my stresses, and it's me on my own. Or if only I was more like that and less like me, which is a real heavy burden to carry as well, I think. Academic pressure at school, such a stressful time. I think especially through the pandemic and remote learning and online learning, like the standards for academia just get higher and higher. Trying to kind of then create a successful university application in the middle of a global pandemic, having not been in touch with teachers or peers face to face, I think has been astronomical, huge. I think
there also seems to be such pressure on young people nowadays actually to go to university.
Absolutely.
You know, so it's like there just seems to be phenomenal amounts of pressure. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, which is a while ago now, but when I was growing up, you know, there were a range of options for people. And it actually wasn't the norm that folks went to university, and so therefore there was choice, but actually there seems to be such a lot of pressure for further education and limited choice elsewhere, or what's perceived as limited choice for elsewhere. And also, I don't know whether there's something around that whole idea that, you know, if you go to university you're a success, but actually if you don't go to university you're not.
Totally.
And it's like, that's not true. It's like, it's just a different pathway, but that must hit children or young people in particular really hard.
Absolutely. Again, it's that like there's only one option, one way to do things, and like you say, if you don't follow those steps and go through what's expected of you at the university, college, whatever, and end up in a good job or whatever, then that's not success. And I think that's something that we're taught from very early on in school. Like when you pick your subjects in third year, you're meant to know what you want to do for the rest of your life, and the pressure of that, of if you make a wrong choice here, you're not going to be able to do, you know, what you want to do. I think that is absolutely a big part of that pressure. Like, what are the other options? Because university is not for everyone, and there's also not real value in going and studying a course if that's not what you want to be doing.
And there's always another way, isn't there?
Absolutely.
So it's like, so if you're, you know, I suppose if you're looking at exams just now and you're looking at grades, or you're thinking about grades, you know, absolutely you want to do as well as you possibly can. But you know, even if you don't get the results that you want or that you need, there's always another way. You know, it's like, so you can go to college and you can do an access course, or you can do this, that, or the next thing. There's always a way to do it. You know, it's like there is no just kind of one route and that's it. People come at things from all different places. But I wonder if that links into the stuff that you're talking about with social media and the fact that it looks as if everybody else is getting it right and you're the only one that's getting it wrong. Totally. And then that becomes an even bigger pressure then to bear, doesn't it? So,
it does. It's kind of like mental health in the large. Like you hear often from children and young people, but people universally, I think, is it just me?
That's right.
As everyone else seems to know what they're doing, and everyone else seems to have A, B, and C. It must just be me, so I'll just not mention it, you know. There's something wrong with me.
But there's also the thing too, though, about what's normal. You know, so like I hear so many people talk about, you know, I'm really depressed. And now I'm not knocking the fact that depression is a real thing that we actually need to treat seriously. I get that, and I'm not knocking that at all. But in actual fact, it's okay to have a bad day. You know, and there's so many young people who we talk about young people's mental health, and I wonder if we should be talking about young people's emotional health rather than their mental health, because actually their mental health's okay. It's just that sometimes their emotions are a bit up and down. But it's almost like, and I don't know if this comes from social media, it's just like, I'm having a bad day, therefore I must be really depressed and I need help. But in actual fact, it's just that it's okay, it's just a bad day, it'll be better tomorrow, or it'll be better next week, or it'll be whatever. And how we actually normalise some of the feelings that we have, create almost containers to hold those feelings in.
Yeah, I think that comes up a lot at Childline, where it actually is really helpful, one, to name feelings, because sometimes it's just not even knowing what's going on. And the second is, normalising having emotions and having emotional responses to things, because often you might be speaking to someone who is like, I don't know why I feel like this, I don't know why I feel like this, don't know what I'm really feeling, I don't know why, there's no reason for it. And the more that you kind of ask questions and explore their world and what it's like to be them, it's like, actually I can completely understand why you're feeling low, or you're feeling angry, or you're feeling exhausted, because you've just told me ABC is going on, and what you're feeling then is entirely valid and normal. I think I'd be concerned if you weren't having some kind of emotional reaction to what's going on in your life.
Yeah. And it's not something that, it's like not something you need to feel the pressure to worry about or have to even fix, because it's actually all right to feel these things and to sit with them for a wee while. It's actually all right to do that. And that's difficult, you know, as adults it's difficult enough to get a handle on that, but for our young people and our children as well, actually that's a big deal to actually get your head around all of that.
Totally.
Have you seen an impact then in terms of young people and children with the pandemic? Has that really impacted folks?
It was, I mean, at Childline, the change in how the service was operating and the nature of the calls we were getting, the pandemic, it was unreal, because all of a sudden, you know, we had children and young people calling, totally understandably, with questions, what is going on, what is going to happen, I'm really worried. And you know, it was a really interesting time, because we as counsellors were like, we don't know, and we're worried too. So that was quite a strange experience from our perspective as well. It's something that we talked about. But yeah, so the worry of, am I going to be ill, or my family going to be ill, was really huge. Then not having access to usual kind of resources. So school is kind of a refuge for some children and young people, or perhaps home isn't the happiest or safest place. So that was huge. Not having access to services that they perhaps usually accessed, or services moving online, which felt very different than face to face. I think for many people, we all have our stuff underneath the surface, and I feel like what I was hearing was, whatever your stuff is, the pandemic brought it all up to the surface, and people were being forced to sit with it and to face it, and not being able to cope in the ways that they normally did. Access to schooling, really difficult. Digital exclusion definitely became a massive issue in terms of not having the tools at home to be learning remotely and online. Learning styles as well, having to be kind of largely self-motivated, not having friends and time with peers at such, especially for teenagers, such a crucial thing as a teenager, like a priority being spending time with your pals and doing the things that you enjoy. Having that completely cut off was devastating, I think, for many callers that I spoke to. And just also a sense of loneliness, anxiety, bereavement. People were losing people throughout COVID-19, either related to the pandemic or just generally, but having to then grieve in isolation. Concerns about parents and parental well-being also came up a lot. So parents struggling with their own mental health and struggling to find ways to cope, which was impacting on, you know, the children and young people in their care, understandably. A lot of concerns. It was just astronomical, really, I think. And I think, although, yes, we're back at schools, and I know I like to say the pandemic's not over, you know, it's still going on, but I don't think we're fully realising the effects yet of what a collectively traumatic event has, how that's impacted our children and young people, and especially those who were in environments where that perhaps weren't safe or happy.
And I guess, you know, having this conversation, I suppose we want to open that conversation up and to be able to say to folks who are watching, whether it's children and young people who are watching or listening, or whether it's adults in houses where there are children and young people, that actually we get it. You know, we understand, and it's okay. It's actually okay to feel. It's okay to be angry at what's happened. It's okay to be sad about what's happened, and actually, because you feel these feelings doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It actually means that there's something very right with you, because you feel because we're designed to feel these kind of feelings, aren't we?
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, I think I'd be more concerned if it was like, this hasn't, you know, affected me, I'm all right with this, made my peace, I'm moving on. I think in order to recover fully, to heal and to process it, it's not something that you can go around the sides of. It is about going through it and sitting with it. And this is for parents and families and caregivers, like you say, and for children and young people, all of us. And it's uncomfortable and it's painful, and I think many of us wish we could just put it in a box and move on, carry on, but we have just been through something that is a collectively historic, traumatic event.
And I suppose too, it's about having almost, it's about how to stay in the present with it, how to recognise that actually we're shaped and influenced by what's happened, but actually there's something that we can step forward into, that actually we walk forward into something new. I was actually thinking, just as you were speaking there, about gift in the pandemic as well, and it's like, because everything brings gift of some description, and I wonder, just as you were speaking, if some of the gift in the pandemic is us being able to recognise that the thing that we thought was brilliant in terms of social media and digital connection actually isn't enough. And perhaps the pandemic cemented for us that we really do need this. We really do need face-to-face interactions, and maybe that's actually how we step forward into the future. And beyond this, that although social media, I'm not knocking the fact that it's still important, it's still important, across the demographics of age, it is still important, but we actually recognise the part that the face-to-face, the physical connection has for people, including young people and children.
Totally. It's really powerful sitting in a space with someone, and I think there's a lot to be said for, like, we can heal and we can recover and we can do it together, and I think that's a big part of it. Like, you're not alone in feeling the way that you do, or if you feel unsure about what the future is going to hold, you're not alone. And I think, if anything as well, what another gift of the pandemic for me was communities rallying around one another when people had to self-isolate or shield, and how communities and mutual aid kind of really, really came to the surface. People rallied, and I think that's something that we need to hold on to and prioritise, is that face-to-face community building, looking out for one another and reminding each other constantly that you're not alone.
Yep, and perhaps that you're okay. It's actually all right. There's nothing, we don't need to pathologise it or anything else. It just is what it is, and it's actually all right. And we can move through it. We can get the other side of it.
Yeah,
I think, I suppose, we would both be wanting to say to children and young people who are watching this or listening to this on whatever platform that there is support available. You've talked about Childline, so there is support available. We have a children's service and a young person service here. If you want to access some kind of space that you just can process some of that stuff, you don't have to have major issues to be able to do that. In fact, sometimes the best time to access that service is actually when you're not having a major issue, because then you've got the resilience to be able to work through the stuff that you want to work through. So that's there, and there are other services across the city that are doing the same thing. Actually connect yourself in with something beyond the virtual world.
Absolutely.
And see the difference that actually makes.
Totally, because we got that at Childline a lot, where people feel like their problems aren't big enough or serious enough, and like, I don't want to waste your time. But that's not how it works at all. Every single worry that you have, we want to hear, and we want to help you with that. There's no problem, too big or too small. And if you're thinking as well about, for example, coming to Healing for the Heart or using another service in the city, if that feels a bit nerve-wracking, what you can do is, for example, Childline, you can phone up and have a practice of what it feels like to talk about yourself and to talk about how you're feeling. Like, that's okay to do that as well. It was really common, or people would phone and practice making difficult phone calls to maybe their GP or whatever. Just have a practice. I really do recommend that as well. And it's just about exploring how you're feeling. Getting to know yourself better too.
And about what works for you, isn't
Totally.
it? Because for some people, actually that one-to-one talking thing doesn't work, so they need to do something creative. So they might want to do art stuff, or they might want to do music or something like that, or they might want to get out and walk in the sunshine. So it's about finding what it is that works for you and then doing some more of it, because it's okay to be okay. You don't need to have a problem. It's actually okay to be okay as well.
I like that. I've never heard that before. It's okay to be okay.
It is okay though, and it's like, we love you even if you're okay. It's like that's fine. I think that as a service here, certainly, we would want to be investing in children and young people, because children and young people aren't the future. Children and young people are the present.
Yes.
And so therefore we want to be investing in children and young people, because we want to see them do whatever it was that they were meant to do. We want to see them blossom. We want to see them move forward. And if we can play a part in helping that, then that's what we're going to do.
Totally. And I think you've hit on a point there that really matters to me as well. Something we've been discussing over at Who Cares, and it's this concept almost that people think of children and young people, or especially teenagers, as like adults in waiting, and that's not how I would view children and young people at all. As a developmental stage of their lives, they're just important exactly where they are and who they are right now.
That's right.
And they're already there, so it is about, you matter, we care, and there's no one size fits all. So it would very much be based on getting to know you and who you are as a person, and what kind of excites you and motivates you and makes you feel like life's something that you're really looking forward to, and the future's something you're really looking forward to.
Yeah, fabulous. So on these podcasts, we always ask, the last question is always the same question, because we get fascinating answers from our guests on the podcast. All right, so if we had some fairy dust, or we had a magic wand, or we had something like that, and we could wave it and create the miracle that would mean that we could improve mental and emotional health for children, young people, everybody, whatever, you can narrow it down if you want. What's the one thing that you think we could change in society or in our culture that would make the biggest impact on that? So what's the one thing, what's the miracle? Where would you sprinkle your fairy dust? What would you change in order to impact?
It's a really good and really big question. I think that for me, there's something about being able to be vulnerable, and that being kind of a priority in society, and something that's held as being kind of integral to all of our mental health and well-being, being able to say honestly how we're feeling, and for that to be received in a meaningful way, and not shied away from. Kind of being taught from a young age how to articulate how we're feeling, and how to receive as well, hearing how someone else feels, with that kind of deep empathy, which is something that I think is something that so many of us kind of just carry and hold kind of organically. But I think, and from that, being able to talk, I think that community for me lies at the heart of mental health and well-being, and belonging, and feeling that you're not alone, and having some place to turn, some person to turn to. And it's something that I think as a society we've kind of moved away from, compared to maybe previous times in history, but something that we do really well. And when it works really well. That it takes a village to raise a child analogy, I think that's absolutely true, but I also think it takes a village to hold an adult too. Doesn't, there's no end to that, if it takes a village. So those kind of things combined for me.
And I suppose that vulnerability thing, it's about almost about helping people see, or changing how we see vulnerability, that actually vulnerability is not about weakness, it's actually about courage and strength.
And that's why it's so hard.
Absolutely, because it takes somebody who's very strong and very courageous to be vulnerable. Fabulous. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here, and we hope that the conversation that we've had today will touch something with somebody who's been listening as well. And again, we would simply reiterate, if there's something that we as an organisation can do for you, even if you're looking for something that we don't have, if we can signpost for you, then get in touch with us and we'll actually help you to do that. And just finally, just where Rosie landed just now, that whole idea of not being alone on, I want to throw out a challenge to you just as we finish. And the challenge would be, who can you be that person for this week? Not who can you find to listen to you, but who can you be the person who's there for somebody else this week? And that's not a heavy thing. That simply maybe means making a phone call, sending a text, smiling at somebody across the office. Who is it that you can actually connect with, and how are you going to connect with them this week? Because that just might make the difference to the person that you connect with.
Totally. Thank you so much for having me.
Fabulous.